Good evening and welcome to Spotlight on Education, Alabama Public Television's quarterly look at some of the issues surrounding education in our state. This show comes at an interesting time, with less than a month to go before the legislature convenes for its 2023 regular session. As always, the top task will be passing the state's general fund budget and education trust fund budget. Both of those funds have surpluses, but it's the ETF that has seen unprecedented growth. Just take a look at these numbers. Last year, the legislature passed an education budget totaling $8.2 billion, a record spending plan that included across-the-board pay raises for teachers and other school workers. But receipts to the Education Trust Fund totaled $10.9 billion last fiscal year, meaning the state has a $2.7 billion surplus. Of course, the question becomes what to do with that money. Lawmakers are discussing a number of ideas, from offering tax rebates to taxpayers to investing in education resources. However, most are stressing that this historic surplus is temporary and that the state should plan for leaner times ahead. I recently spoke about this issue with State Representative Danny Garrett, who chairs the Education Budget Committee in the House.
I think we're in a good spot. We're not alone in having the surplus. Now the question is, what do we do with that surplus? There's a lot of talk about doing a tax rebate, which I think is something that we are going to talk about. The governor certainly indicated that she would like to do that, and a lot of support for that. We're beginning to hear some people kind of push back on that and say, well, why don't we redirect the money into some of these areas that are underperforming in the state? We'll have that discussion. My sense is we'll probably do a rebate of some size. Some people talk about permanent tax cuts, but when you look at the state of Alabama's taxes and you put them all together, we're very low on property taxes. We have higher sales tax rates. They're local sales tax rates primarily. You put all of it together, though, we are the lowest tax per capita in the country. So when you're trying to look at how we perform and compete against other states and the services we provide, you have to consider that. I think tax reform is something we should discuss. But actually, permanent tax cuts, we've got to be careful because we're dependent heavily, unlike most states, on income and sales tax. Most states are dependent more on property taxes, which tend to be very stable. Sales and income taxes fluctuate wildly. When the money's coming in, they go up. When the money's not there, they drop. So we're looking at all of that in a very disciplined approach, and I think that good news is we're in a good spot. I think we've managed fiscally responsible, but we're not the only state that has these surpluses. In fact, we have much less than many.
In her second inaugural address, Governor Kay Ivey spoke at length about the need to improve education. But she went a step further, laying out some ambitious goals for this, her last term in office. Ivey said that Alabama students would rank in the 30s for reading and math by the end of her term.
Ensuring every Alabama student receives a high-quality education will be my number one focus. We will build upon the foundation we have laid so that by the end of my term, Alabama will rank in the top 30 states for the first time in our history in reading and math. But in order to be first, we have to continue to move up. Here in Alabama, we support, in fact, we encourage our parents to be involved in their children's educational journeys from birth and on through their pre-K through high school experiences. Let me be clear. Parents are crucial to a student's success. And parents, we want your input and your involvement in our schools.
I'll speak with State Superintendent Eric Mackey about those lofty goals later in the show. Talladega County schools are shaking things up in the classroom, using some innovative ways to reach students. As APT's Karen Goldsmith reports, it could be a model for other areas to emulate.
Years ago, we read a book called Shaking Up the Schoolhouse, and it really showcased how education needed to change and become more in the 21st century.
She says they use project-based learning, which gives students a real-world perspective on solving problems.
For example, at one of our elementary schools, the students worked with the local city council to develop a plan for refurbishing a local park. Some of their suggestions were actually implemented with the refurbishment of the park.
And students at a Talladega County high school are building tiny houses.
That is a workforce development need as far as plumbing, electricity, design, drafting. The students are learning all of those skills. And once the tiny house is completed, they take that to market. Last year they sold it for $50,000.
Their building science students gutted and refurbished this former school bus to become the ZIP, which stands for Z-Space Immersive Playground.
They put flooring down, they covered the windows with sheet metal, painted the inside, ran the wiring.
The ZIP contains 14 Z-Space units that allow students to virtually dissect frogs, look at the solar system, and even examine the human heart.
And this is actually one where you can simulate putting electrodes to do an EKG on a patient. So this will actually be used with our health science classes.
Wow.
I think that it provides students with some voice and choice in how they prefer to learn. Also, we feel like ZIP, Z-Space utilizes technology that our students are already familiar with. It provides them with real-world learning in the 21st century using technology that they're probably engaging in at home.
And so it will be stationed at different schools for a few weeks at a time, so teachers can bring their entire class out and have that experience versus maybe just doing the demonstration because of lack of materials. So it will really be a great way for teachers to engage their entire class in these experiences.
For Spotlight on Education, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
We'll be right back with our special guests here on Spotlight.
Most children in Alabama don't have access to formal pre-K programs to help them prepare for school. But all children in Alabama have access to the children's programming on Alabama Public Television. And these programs are proven to help children start school better prepared to succeed. Just watching programs like Sesame Street, Super Why, and Curious George can have a profound impact on how well kids do from kindergarten all the way through high school. APT also provides training and resources to parents and child care providers throughout the state to help them make the most of these great programs. It's on-air pre-K every day on Alabama Public Television, and APT encourages parents to watch these valuable programs with their children.
Next, I'm joined by Dr. Eric Mackey, Alabama's Superintendent of Education. Dr. Mackey, thanks for coming on Spotlight.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to be here.
Well, yeah, you're the one we want to hear from when it comes to education issues, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. And we showed a little bit of the governor's speech. Had some interesting topics, but really on education, what stuck out to me was, look, every governor talks about education in their inaugural, right? Probably going back to when we had schoolhouses. But she set out some pretty ambitious goals, saying she wants Alabama to rank in the top 30 for reading and math by the end of her term. That's only 4 years. That's a very lofty goal. Is it feasible?
Yeah, we're very excited about that. We're really fortunate that Governor Ivey has focused on education, not just during election season, but throughout her first term and the partial term she had before that. She's made it clear that it's a goal to make sure that all children around the state have high quality opportunities for good education. And I share her enthusiasm. I think we can make big gains. As you know, even with all the problems that we had during COVID, we were able to jump 12 places in math in just 2 years, one testing cycle. So I feel really good that we can make those other extensive changes. Now, that takes work. It takes work down to the schoolhouse level and the classroom level. It means supporting teachers, getting them that high quality professional development and opportunities they need, and it has to be sustained over time. So this is like it's like a hard pressed game. There is no letting up, but I do think we can make great gains over the next 4 years. And and when you look particularly at the NAEP, that means 2 testing cycles. So now we used to test in odd years, now we test in even years, so that'd be 24, and then the 26 cycle will be our next 2 times to take the NAEP.
Well, I was talking to Chairman Garrett, chairman of the House Education Budget Committee, about some of this same stuff, and he was making the point that, look, you've got a lot of school districts and schools in Alabama who are well above the national average. We've also got many, several that are well below, and so low is their proficiency that it kind of pulls that average down. And so the obvious solution is focus on those schools and get them up. But that seems a lot easier said than done.
Well, yeah, you have to look at the NAEP is an interesting test. So remember, not everybody takes it. About 3% of our population take it, and it's a what they call a semi-random or a selected random choice. So it's not truly randomized. They look for a certain diversity population. So many of our best performing schools are not very diverse, and so they are automatically taken out of the selection pool. So you have a certain group of schools that are in that pool. Some schools get chosen over and over again. We don't know which schools are going to take the test until the last minute, and it's illegal for us to do special preparation for the test for those schools anyway. So what we have to think about is we're going to consider that everybody's taking the test every year. And that's why we've redone our standards, our state standards in reading and math, and our state test in reading and math to be aligned to the NAEP for the first time ever, so that as teachers are teaching our state standards aligned to our state test, they're in effect also teaching the NAEP framework.
And every student takes those ALCAP tests, correct?
Every student across the state takes those ALCAP tests, or every student in grades 2 through 8 take them, yes.
Well, the specific subjects mentioned were reading and math.
Right.
And so it just so happens Alabama has enacted legislation specifically on those subjects in recent years. Back in 2019, it was the Literacy Act, and then a little bit later, I guess in 22, was the Numeracy Act.
Yep.
And so obviously trying to focus attention really on those key areas. I'm assuming that because it was enacted back in 2019, the Literacy Act is a little further along in terms of implementation. Can you tell us where we are?
Yeah, absolutely. So with literacy, we are much further along. We really have 2 things going for us. One, our Literacy Act is based on the old Alabama Reading Initiative, really bringing it back and then hyping it up on steroids. So we already had an infrastructure in place. We also showed that if we determined we were going to do better, we could do better. Now, from the inception of the Alabama Reading Initiative until the time when we met the national average, we actually ranked 33rd in the nation in reading. It took us about 14 years, I guess, to make that change. So it takes a long time. Then, of course, the state pulled back on the Reading Initiative, really underfunded it. And we lost a lot of those gains, and we went back to close to 50th. But we know we can get there. We have been 33rd before. We're already back up to 39th, so we only need to move 6 places, and we'll be right back where we were when we were at the height of our reading success. And as the governor said, we want to actually go above that and get out of the 30s. So we know the formula. We know what has to be done. We are way ahead because we have reading coaches in all of our schools. We have regional specialists. We have a really good professional training program called Letters that we're rolling out to thousands of teachers in pre-K through 3. So we're doing a lot of that work. Now, math and numeracy, that's going to be different. So first, remember that the first math coach has not been placed yet. That bill passed last year. It was funded in the current year's budget, which means it'll be next fall before those folks get math coaches. There are 87 schools that will qualify for math coaches in the first round per the Act, and we've already notified those superintendents that which schools are getting a math coach. We're working this month in getting a memorandum of understanding with them so they'll know what that math coach, what the qualifications need to be, but they're already looking for people and they already know how much money they're going to get to hire a math coach next year. But all that other work You know, it's not like reading where we had a successful program. We just had to pick it back up. With math, we really are starting from scratch on these math coaches. And then the other thing I'd say is there's not the national body of research in math that there is in reading. So there are huge volumes of work that have been done around the science of reading going back 4 or 5 decades, really culminating in the 2000 National Reading Panel report. No such extensive research in mathematics has ever been done. There are pieces here and there, and we have a really good elementary math task force that's pulling together what they can, but again, it's not as comprehensive a research basis as what we have in reading. So we'll have to kind of work through that. It'll be a little bit of a different roadmap for math.
Well, you know, perhaps down the road, people will be using our numeracy act as their, model. Down the road. You never know. And one more point on literacy: the accountability provision, the retention, the holdback provision doesn't happen for another year. So this will be further along than originally planned. Are you pretty confident that students will be ready and teachers will be ready for that cutoff date?
Yeah, we really are. When we look at other states, particularly Mississippi does a holdback provision, our students are performing about where they are on our state test compared to their state test. They're very comparable. So we've looked at what are the provisions they have in place, what are the provisions we have in place. Remember that there are multiple hurdles, if you will, that students can jump. So the first one is obviously the state test. If they don't perform at grade level on the state test, then they're potentially held back. We know from this last year's testing, it's about 23%, 22% of our students. So we take that and then we say, well, could they go to summer school and retest? So they have another opportunity to retest at the end of summer school. We've already done that. Even though the holdback provision was not in place, we know that about half the students who go through summer school are able to pass the test at the end of an intensive summer of reading instruction after 3rd grade. So that's good. Some of them also have individualized education plans that'll come into play. Some of them will look at a portfolio. So there'll be other opportunities to pass too. But
it's not like this one time, okay, you failed the test and that's it.
That's right. This is not this is not getting into medical school. It's important, but we want students to have multiple ways to demonstrate that they're capable readers. Now, in the end, if they cannot demonstrate they're capable readers, there's no question in my mind that at the end of 2024, there will be students who will not progress to the 4th grade because they're not ready for 4th grade work. On that end, it's up to our local superintendents and the curriculum people are working right now, because we've been talking to them about you can't just put them back into 3rd grade and do the same thing again. If they've had 4 years of school, 5 years if they had pre-K, and if they still have not learned to read on a sufficient level, then something's going on, and we have to do something different to help those students be successful. So I feel really good about where we're going, and in 24 will be the first year that we see what it looks like. Mm-hmm. We'll know a little more, by the way, at the end of this year. So we've given the ACAP test twice. We'll give it one more time this year. I think after 3 years of reading data, we'll have a pretty good assessment of which schools have really high numbers in danger of retention and which schools are doing okay.
Well, maybe Dolly Parton can help. I saw that the governor came out with this as part of her executive orders after Inauguration Day, partnering with the Dolly Parton Initiative about getting books to kids, really young kids, on a monthly basis. Tell me about this initiative and how you're excited about it.
I am so excited about the Dolly Parton Imagination Library and our work as a department with the Department of Early Childhood Education and Governor Ivey's leadership on this. We know that there's nothing more important to a child being ready to read in school than the child's parent and reading to children. And so one of the ways we encourage that is by getting books in the hands of parents. I will tell you, when I was a local superintendent, we partnered in Calhoun County with our local United Way to do this, close to 20 years ago, and the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. And my son actually participated And we gave every year to United Way specifically to help buy books. So what happens? We identify families. Children can get a book when they're born. They get a book called The Little Engine That Could. We've all heard that story before.
Absolutely.
And then they get another book that is selected and is age and developmentally appropriate all the way up until they turn 5 years old. So they can get 60 months, they can get 60 books. It's free to the family, and it's relatively inexpensive for the state. Dolly Parton Imagination Library they procure the books, they handle printing, they work with the state then on distribution. The most difficult part of this is getting the addresses. So you and I and folks we know and who've gone to college or are committed to education, they're going to sign up. They're already going and buying their kids' books at Books A Million, those kind of things. But the problem is that we have folks who, they don't know how important that is. Maybe they don't know how to connect and get their names and addresses on the labels. They may be immigrant families. So the key is we're going to have community partners, churches, community agencies, family resource centers that are actively seeking and signing up expectant moms, right? I mean, you can sign up when your child's 2 years old, but ideally we want to sign up all the expectant moms in the state. I'm sure we'll be working with Medicaid to try to make sure moms get identified and sign up, and then when their child's born, they get that first book.
It seems to me when you describe it, it's at least as much about training that parent into reading to the kid and getting, as much as it is about the child itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of research around reading. I mentioned that we do a lot of high-tech things around reading, but it's very simple that the best predictor of whether a child will be a good reader is whether they're read to at a very early age. Now, that's not to say we have children who have neurological disabilities or disorders that keep them from learning at a normal pace. But the best thing that can happen is for a parent to be reading what we call a decodable text, so an easy-to-read book, and the child's looking at the words, the parent's looking at the words, and they're following along. I mean, that is absolutely the best preparation for teaching a child to read. So we need more parents doing that. Now, we've got to identify the parents. We've got to get the books in their hand. Governor Ivey's taken the leadership and said we're going to get the books out there to them. And then the next thing, of course, is some parent education. Those books don't need to just sit around, or the children don't need to just look at the pictures. They need to be reading to their children.
Yeah. Well, switching gears a little bit, we've got the legislative session coming up in a little more than a month, or less than a month. We've got this almost unprecedented situation where a 20% surplus in the Education Trust Fund. Of course, every time I mention that, budget leaders and others say, "Hey, it's temporary. It's not. Yeah. It's a lot of it's trickled down from the federal government, and so maybe not as much next year." Still, those are significant resources. They're talking tax rebates and things like that. But do you see, from your perspective, maybe some plus-ups in education accounts that can contribute to some of this improvement? Do you foresee asking the legislature for some of that?
Well, we're absolutely going to ask for some. I think you have to look at two things. One is there is this rather large unappropriated balance that's sitting out there and really is one-time money. So we're having discussions, obviously, with legislative leadership, and particularly now with the governor and her staff, about what are some really good long-term investments for funds that are not going to be replicated in the future. So what are some one-time investments that this unappropriated balance could be used for? And then the other one is that the growth is still pretty significant. We used to struggle. We thought 3% growth a year was really good. Many years we would get 1.5% to 2%, and now we've had a year of 20% growth. It's, I think, right now about 8%, and so you're still talking about pretty hefty growth. Obviously, we want to invest that in the classroom and in our professionals. We need high-quality teachers who are highly trained, and so I think you're going to see most of that money. Our request be about getting money into the classroom, getting money to the teachers and to the professionals that keep our schools going. That's going to mean increases in the reading initiative, some increases in our mathematics initiative because we want more of those math coaches, obviously growing that out. There are going to be some other things, though, that are just natural inflationary growth. So school buses is a big one for us. We run 87 million miles a year on school buses. That's a lot of tires. Tires, diesel fuel, those kind of things are really expensive, and inflationary factors pretty high. So we're going to be asking for more just to stay even on those same things.
Mm-hmm. Well, that reminds me of the Senator Orr has said that he wants to invest in principals, try to get maybe some salary increases to maybe help recruit principals and things like that. Seeing as how all teachers got an across-the-board raise, and there was a bigger one for more experienced teachers. Talk about the importance of having the right administrators in schools, and maybe your thoughts on his proposal.
Yeah, obviously we have a teacher shortage that's getting better, but it's not completely healed yet. We have a little less of an administrative shortage, but we do have one. We actually do. When we look at it, you may say, well, there's only one principal for every 60 teachers in a school, but it's hard to convince people to take on that extra responsibility. The principalship has always been difficult. It's more difficult now than it's ever been before. And I think his idea of we're gonna pay more, but we're gonna expect more. So as he and I have talked about it, I know he's looking at a bill that would require some very specific, in-depth leadership training, organizational structural training to try to help people be better principals, but then say to them also, if you do these things, then the state's going to come in and work with your local school board to give pay incentives. Very similar, what we're talking about, obviously he's not filed the bill yet, but what we're talking about in concept, very similar to what we do for national board certified teachers. So there's already the pay structure. It doesn't affect their tenure, it doesn't affect their other contractual obligations, but that national board gives them additional money. And then, as you know, with national board certified teachers, we give an additional supplement if they're a national board certified teacher in a high need school. Mm-hmm. So I don't know all of those pieces that the senator is going to include, but we've certainly had some really good conversations about it, and I think it's important that we have high quality principals and assistant principals in every building.
Well, real quick, I know I've taken a lot of your time, but while I've got you, we mentioned the teacher pay raise and that kind of schedule of pay increases. It's now been in effect for a little while. Talk about what you've seen in terms of impact and maybe what you've heard from local superintendents about the impact of that policy.
So last year, we saw the lowest number of retirements that we had had since 2014. So just that one statistic, there may be a lot of things that played into that, but I can tell you from multiple dozens of teachers who've talked to me when I go out and visit schools and out in the community, we had many people, and I'm going to say a few hundred, who delayed their retirement because of the big increase they could get for staying a few more years. Now we know that's temporary. So if they already were retirement eligible, they now can continue to get those pay raises up to about 33 years, but at some point in the next 3 to 5 years, those folks are going to retire. So we have to think about ways to backfill that. I think we're going to continue to have to invest in teacher salaries. I don't know what might be floated out this year as far as a percentage, but there's no question that at this point we're competing with the private sector. The private sector is chasing inflationary factors, and so we have to always consider that. And I know that'll be weighing heavily on the governor and her staff and the legislative leadership as they think about what can we afford, what can we sustain, but everybody wants to invest in our professionals. So I think we'll see that continue to grow. I hope that we're going to have more and more young people who are coming into the profession, but that battle's not over. We still have to do more work to attract people into teaching.
Well, Dr. Mackey, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on Spotlight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
Alabama Public Television's Ready to Learn service is on the road every week, providing on-site workshops, resources, and books for child care professionals, teachers, and parents across the state. On the go, helping children grow. Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Ryan Cantrell, National Director of Government Affairs for the American Federation for Children. Ryan, thanks for coming on Spotlight.
Great to be here.
Well, can you tell our viewers more about the American Federation for Children and what your organization does?
Yeah, so the American Federation for Children is the nation's largest school choice advocacy organization. We're active in roughly half the states across the country, and really we work on three main things. We work to educate the public, educate lawmakers on what school choice does and how impactful it is to parents. We educate parents on how they can enroll their child in school choice programs that are passed throughout the country. Second main thing we do is we elect lawmakers. We have an affiliated 527 organization, political organization that just this last year spent roughly $9 million across the country, making sure that lawmakers were elected who are going to support school choice and support families who want to give their kids more educational options. The last thing we do is we enact legislation. We work with lawmakers once they're elected to really dial in on what types of school choice could be helpful in their states, what parents are wanting, how parents are wanting to have more of an active role in their child's education. And like I said, we're active roughly half the states across the country really doing those three main pillars.
Well, that's exactly why I wanted to have you on, because right now, leading up to the legislative session, it starts a little less than a month from now, school choice is kind of this buzzword. We heard it during the campaign. We've heard it throughout the last couple of months. The governor, in her inauguration speech, was big on it. The lieutenant governor was big on it. But it's been my observation that the word kind of gets thrown around, the term rather, school choice. But it seems to me that people kind of mean different things when they say it. Some mean charters, some mean vouchers, some mean savings accounts. But as the sort of preeminent school choice organization, what do you mean when you say it, or what do you want Alabama lawmakers to hear when you say school choice?
So for us, school choice means giving parents the option to choose their child's best educational environment. Whether that's a public school, a private school, homeschool, virtual school, you name it, whatever works best for that child, we want parents to be able to have the resources to be able to put their child in that type of environment. But in order to get here, I feel like you really have to look back to where our education system started. If you look back in the mid-1850s, which is kind of what our current education system is based on, it was really based on this, everybody was fit into a single type of educational environment and, very much one-size-fits-all type of system. And what we've seen over the course of the decades is we've just kind of put that on autopilot. And I think we all know that this country is not the same country as it was in the 1850s, and we need to be educating kids in a different way. Just very much like how technology has changed, we need to change the way and adapt the way that we're doing education in order for us to be able to get what is best out of our kids.
Well, I know that you all have had some success in passing these laws, savings accounts laws. Senator Marsh called it the mother of all school choice bills. Arizona was a notable example. I think Florida just passed a law, and Iowa as well. These are education savings accounts, right, where a parent can essentially keep a portion of their tax dollars to use toward whatever school of their choice for their student. Do you think a law like that would work in Alabama, or are there different applications?
There are different applications in every state. I think the great thing about an education savings account program is it really is the most customizable school choice program that you can get. What an ESA does is Arizona is a great example. Arizona gives $7,500 to any family who signs up for the program. With that $7,500, that's roughly 100% of what the state funds for each kid in Arizona. And what that money is able to be used for is tuition. They could use it to send their kid to a private school if they choose to do that. If they want to homeschool their child, they can use it for curriculum and access to tutoring and whatever else they need. If there's some combination of the different educational models, they can use it for that as well. So it really does allow for the parent to customize the education to the degree that they want to for their child. And so here in Alabama, it could work the exact same way. Every parent is not going to choose the exact same type of educational environment for their child. And an education savings account really puts the power in the hands of parents to say, you know your child best, and we trust you to make sure that your child is getting the education they need.
Well, when the bill came up last year, because Senator Marsh had a bill, Representative Meadows had a bill, I guess they were identical. The criticism I heard, some of it, was from those saying, all right, well, let's just say this passes, and the many thousands of parents that already have their child in a private school have already made that choice and are paying, essentially just get a tax break, right? And maybe it doesn't, even if no student signs up for a different educational option, suddenly there's just money gone from the budget and people are getting a tax break. Can you respond to that kind of criticism? I mean, because it seems valid in terms of, are we actually helping, improve student outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, so the part of that people don't like to talk about or haven't talked about as much is that, is that family that is really struggling because their child may be, zoned to a school that just isn't working for them. And so they're scraping together every dollar they can to send their kid to an environment that works better for them. At the end of the day, that's what we should all want. We should all, the purpose of public education is to educate the public. It's not to set up certain buildings and make sure that everybody goes to those certain buildings. The purpose of public education is to allow kids to thrive and to ultimately be able to have successful lives. So it's, there are these families that, yes, they may have their kids in a private school, but man, if we could give them just a little bit of a cushion, maybe it allows them to do a little bit more with their child. Maybe it allows them to spend a little bit more time at home with their child. So we can't neglect that. The other part of this is just this whole idea that school choice programs takes money away from the public. That is at the core of this argument. And I would say every study that has been done across the country shows that school choice programs actually save states money. In most states, it's anywhere from $1 to $2.50 per child per dollar that's put into the program. It saves the state. So at the end of the day, we could be funding students to participate in these school choice programs while at the same time having additional monies that could be used in the public school classrooms as well.
Well, you get to that point about that family that's struggling, that really doing everything they can to have that private school option or whatever option. So that gets to the question, like, should there be a means test in an education savings account bill, so that if you're wealthy, maybe you don't get the tax cut, but if you are that struggling middle class family, you do. Has that been discussed? As y'all have passed around drafts?
Yeah. So AFC firmly believes that low-income families should be at the front of the line. Regardless of the type of program that's set up, low-income families should always get priority in these programs. Vast majority of the programs across the country are set up that way. Iowa, for example, just passed a month or so ago the first education savings account in their state. It is a universal program. It's a program that it will, in 3 years, allow for every family to have access to this program. But for the first 2 years, we're going to focus on those families who need it most. We're going to focus on those low-income families. Utah also recently just passed a similar type program that is capped monetarily, so every student is eligible, but there's only $42 million right now that's allocated to the program. Because of that, we said, hey, listen, low-income families have to be prioritized. We want to make sure that they are the first ones to get a crack at that $42 million. So AFC's position will always be that low-income families need to be prioritized. Does that mean that we can't get to a place where we're letting all families have a chance to participate in these programs? No, but we do believe that low-income families should always be at the front of the line.
Mm-hmm. The other question I hear, and I remember from last year, is, do you open up district lines? Because Senator Marsh was kind of big on that. Hey, it shouldn't matter with the zip code and all that, and so, theoretically, all right, if you're zoned for this school, suddenly you're able to. If you're zoned for, Jefferson County, suddenly you can go to Mountain Brook. I mean, that may be an extreme example, but it's something. Where theoretically that sounds good, but folks in Mountain Brook might not want just their school opened up to anybody who can apply. So will that be addressed in terms of the sort of the breaking down of school districts and things like that?
I'm sure there'll be a bill that's introduced that addresses enrollment boundary lines. I mean, we see this across the country. That's a big thing right now. But I think, you know, it's easy to defend the current way that we do things, but really what we're talking about is creating these arbitrary red lines around zip codes or around school buildings or whatever it is. And we're saying if you live in this circle, you're going to go to this school, regardless of whether it works for you or not. And that's inherently not fair for families, especially for families who are zoned for these schools that, for whatever reason, are underperforming. Those families need a way out. And whether it's through open enrollment policies that allow them to...
Open enrollment, that's the term I've been searching around for.
Whether it's open enrollment policies that allow them to escape that boundary to another public school, or whether it's through an ESA or a tax credit scholarship like we already have here in Alabama that allows students to apply for a scholarship to go to a private school. We should be doing whatever it takes to make sure that our kids are getting a high quality education.
While I've got you here, I want to talk about charter schools because I'm hearing a lot of conversation about this too. Right here in Montgomery, there's this kind of experiment going on with the conversion charter model. Not the new school coming to town, but the same buildings, maybe many of the same teachers, but new leadership, new accountability requirements and all that. Where do charter schools, and specifically the conversions, kind of fit into y'all's school choice model?
I mean, listen, we are supportive of all types of school choice. Charter schools are a fantastic mechanism and have been incredibly successful in a lot of places. I think they can be incredibly successful in Alabama. We've already seen some charter schools in Alabama be incredibly successful. And so I think it's important that we continue down this road and continue to experiment. AFC believes that we need an all-in approach. You know, charter schools is a key cog of that. Private school choice is a key cog of that. Homeschooling is a key cog. At the end of the day, we need to be making sure that we're funding kids to be able to get the education that they need. And I look forward to seeing, you know, what happens here in Montgomery. I think, you know, the added flexibility, the added accountability will be incredibly beneficial to the students in the city.
Well, a big topic to watch as the session approaches. Ryan, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Todd. Good seeing you.
We'll be right back.
The Alabama Department of Archives and History was founded in 1901, becoming the nation's first publicly funded independent state archives agency. The archives identifies, preserves, and makes accessible records and artifacts of enduring historical value to the state. Thomas Owen founded the agency and served as its first director. He was succeeded by his wife, Marie Bankhead Owen, who headed the archives for 35 years and was the second woman to lead a state agency.
Next, I'm joined by Ed Castile, Executive Director of AIDT. Mr. Castile, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for asking.
So I said AIDT. I was going to let you explain that acronym, what your role is there, and what your agency does for the state.
Sure. Alabama Industrial Development Training. And the full name is Institute. We only use the 4 letters. So AIDT is what we're known for, or as, worldwide actually. Mm-hmm. And our job is to help, part of the incentives is the state does to bring in new business, to help convince companies to expand in Alabama. Having a good workforce, recruit, screen, train the workforce is a challenge. And so 50 plus years ago, the state saw fit to put in a program, the AIDT, to help with that. Mm-hmm. And so for those years and now our job is to help work with the Department of Commerce. We're part of the department, but work with the Department of Commerce in recruiting business. And again, working with existing businesses as they expand. And our job as an incentive is to help them recruit, screen, and train specifically on what the need is. You know, if they're building cars or airplanes or making chemicals, you know, call centers, whatever it may be, these individuals may have experience, or maybe they've been to one of our 2-year colleges and have some education, but they may not have the specific thing that this company needs. So we focus on those very specific things and then help the companies make a good decision on who to hire. And so at the end of the day, that's our main mission and goal, is to, one, to help bring companies in as part of the incentive package. And the incentive is there's no cost. The companies do not pay for our assistance, and neither do the employees or trainees as they work with us. So that's the incentive part. And then again, help them recruit, screen, vet, and then actually do some very specific training on the job. Some cases in pre-hire, we do some training.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because we were talking about, we're the spotlight on education. So we spend a lot of time talking about pre-K. We talk about K through 12. We talk about higher ed and two-year college. But the end result is getting a job, right? The end result is employment, entering that workforce. And so that's why I thought it would be appropriate and helpful to learn from you about, all right, it's not all K through 12. It's not all the traditional education. Sometimes they need that more specific training training for the job, right?
True, but it all works together. I mean, we really need our applicants to have a K-12 good foundation. We certainly want them to have a diploma or a GED, if not a diploma. But that's, we've got to have a good, solid, basic education foundation so they can train. They are trainable. Mm-hmm. If they wind up in career tech ed in high school or in the K-12 system, they're really a good candidate because they've done things. They've been involved in some of these skills that we may be recruiting for in a manufacturer, for example. Or maybe it's other jobs, but certainly they have some hands on it and done it. The two-year colleges, I mean, if they come to us and they've been in the two-year system, then that's just a much better candidate on top of that.
They're way ahead.
They're way ahead. And then, but when they get to the job, we were talking about welding earlier. They may have been welding in steel work for a long time, but if they're going to work at Austell, they need to be welding not only steel but in aluminum. Totally different type of thing. And so we do the training on those job specifics to help them transition from either the job they've had or the education experience they've had and move into the new job. Mm-hmm. So our role is to help bridge that difference, and again, help the company make a good selection on a new team member. Mm-hmm. Somebody that's going to fit in their culture, not just the skill, but the attitude, the work ethics, those kind of things are important, obviously, too. And we work hard to help the companies find the right persons to fit those molds that they're looking for in an employee.
Switching gears, we recently reported on this new survey that you commissioned working with Signal. It was a great polling company. And it looked into barriers for folks entering the workforce. We report on unemployment numbers every month, but sort of hidden in that is the workforce participation rate, which has lagged a little bit. So your survey showed barriers to folks entering the workforce, basically asking them, if you're not working, why not? Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest was transportation. I found that really surprising. What were your takeaways?
Well, it was a little bit of a surprise that transportation was it. But if you think about it, not everybody has children at home. And child care is certainly one of those top issues.
That's what I expected.
Probably
to see, yeah.
Number 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Maybe number 2. I'm like you, I was a little surprised that wasn't first. But then when you think about what we read or what we saw, not everybody has children, and there are a lot of single folks that go to work, and transportation may be the challenge. And it's not, and most everybody can get anywhere once, but can you get there every day at 6 in the morning, consistently and so forth? And I think that's where the challenge is for some, especially if they're new hires or they're relatively new into the workplace. Maybe they've come from, a poverty area, something like that, and they just don't have the means to have the transportation. So we and many others across the state are all looking at those things. This survey helped us now hone in on that. What I learned from it, we've got a lot of work to do, number one. And I will tell you that the workforce issues are easing up a little bit. And I think they're easing up a little bit for several reasons. One, we've done a lot of work to help it, everybody. You mentioned K-12 and the two-year guys and universities, many programs outside of those, some in our department, the apprenticeship program, the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship, the STEM Council, the STEM work that's going on with K-12, the WIOA program, which is a federal program that every state has funds for. We have that responsibility. And then our regional workforce councils. All of those have initiatives about them that are focused on these very things. Child care, focused on child care, how to help it. What can we recommend to our legislators as some solutions to that? Mm-hmm. So this survey, it helped us pinpoint a few things, and you're thinking, okay, well, we thought child care. Well, now, okay, obviously we need to focus more on transportation. And although we knew it was there and it was certainly an issue, so what we've done at the AIDT is, we're looking at how we can remove that barrier. Mm-hmm. How can we get them to the training and then to the job once they get it, at least for a period of time until they have enough money or enough resources to be able to take care of their own transportation. And I don't know that we have the perfect solution at all, but we're certainly every day a host of our staff working on those solutions. So this survey just helped us, pinpoint that a little bit. What we saw that was encouraging, though, was that about 3/4 of those respondents said they're going to seek employment in 2023. Hooray!
Yeah,
we need them desperately.
Right.
So we hope that number is across any sampling that we do remains that way, because of the initiatives we've done. Maybe it's to do with inflation and the high cost of everything. Whatever it is, we are beginning to see more numbers as applicants and coming to interviews, filling out the applications, and working with us through these processes to help them get to the job. Mm-hmm. And I think the survey helped us, again, pinpoint that a little bit. We also learned from it, that some of, and one of the surprises to me was that a number of them didn't even seek additional training while they were either unemployed or underemployed when they would have had time to do it. And I know, and I can vouch for and help promote many initiatives and training programs, most of them at no cost, or certainly little to no cost based on some help. Why they didn't do it, and from that now, we're scratching our head trying to figure out, all right, what do we got to do better to help them see what those are and why that matters to them? What is the pathway to the credential they need, or why didn't they why haven't they picked up on that issue? And there's a number of reasons that could be, and we're trying to figure out that. So this survey just helped us shape our approach a little bit differently, hone it a little better, that kind of thing.
Data is always helpful.
Data, and data doesn't lie.
That's right.
It makes you crazy sometimes, but it doesn't lie to you.
The numbers don't lie. Well, while I have you, I wanted to ask you this question. It seems like the nature of workforce has really almost been turned on its head in the last couple of years, COVID related, and our economy has changed so much. Our culture has changed so much in just the last couple of years. So how does AIDT and commerce more generally stay ahead of the game? And it's such a rapidly changing workforce environment.
It is. It is rapidly changing. So is technology in the jobs. Today in Alabama, many of our companies are really digital smart factories. And you've got to have a pretty high level of education to work in a manufacturing concern today. In tech companies, we can name 1,000 different opportunities for our citizens to go to work. So we have to have a good, sound education. We have to have the workforce to a trainable level. So your question, we just have to listen carefully and study that data. Every day, right now, for example, we're working at the AIDT with roughly 142 projects, 40 counties. So we're seeing a diverse group of companies trying to find, their workforce in a diverse set of counties. Some of them are very rural, some of them are not. And so there's a lot of different dynamics going on. Well, what we saw what we've learned that during the pandemic, one, everything changed. Not everything, but most everything changed. And so what we certainly learned was that employees today and potential workers, they want a good work-life balance. You know, they'll go to work in a telework or non-remote kind of job, certainly, but they don't want to work, you know, 7 days a week. You know, they want to have some time, so they want a work-life balance. They want a shift situation that helps them have time at home or whatever their fun is, or their what we've learned is that the workforce is really needs not only physical safety but emotional safety. They want to know the company cares about them, that the company has a clue about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, are we taking care of the environment? I mean, you know, things that maybe when I was getting into the workforce we weren't thinking so much about. Well, today this younger workforce is, and what we see in our numbers, probably more than half, or at least the younger set of millennials and now the Gen Zs in our workforce. So how we react to that and how we respond to what they need and how the company does will help us be a success.
I hate that we're out of time, but I really want to thank you again for coming on the show and explaining all this to our audience, and we'll have you back soon.
Thank you, Todd. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah,
good to see you.
Absolutely. That's our show. Thanks again for watching Spotlight on Education. As a reminder, if you want to keep up with some of these issues and others facing our state, watch Capital Journal Friday nights at 7:30 and Sundays at noon right here on Alabama Public Television. For our APT team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.